key focus in 2024 for the South Korean financial authorities, improving the livelihoods of the people. In the meantime, the country is forecast to expand a little over 2% this year. The authorities also aim to bring down inflation to 2.6%. South Korea and the U.S. have held their first joint exercise of the year near the inter-Korean border. On the other side of the DMZ, North Korea continues its threats, saying the chances of a clash will be at their highest this year. Nearly 100 people were killed on Wednesday in Iran from twin explosions near the barrier site of a slain military commander. This deepens concerns over wider war in the Middle East. It's January 4th, 2024. This is Newscenter. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. I'm Yoon Jung-min. We begin with major economic directions in 2024 that'll affect people's livelihoods. Taking matters into his own hands, President Yoon today held the first New Year briefing, having invited ordinary citizens to make sure that their voices are being better heard. There, the president promised bold regulatory reform. Our presidential office correspondent Oh Soo-young reports.
President Yoon Suk-yeol has pledged bold and decisive regulatory reform and active sales diplomacy this year to prop up the South Korean economy. This came during the president's revamped New Year government briefing, where he invited members of the public for the first time for a broader policy discussion as part of his aim to heed the voices of the people. Comprising of small business owners, homemakers and young people, along with government officials and experts, the first session on Thursday focused on small and medium-sized enterprises, emphasizing the need to reduce the burden of high interest rates on households, protect individual investors, and improve access to finance for small business owners. The South Korean leader said the government this year will continue to stabilize people's livelihoods and enable dynamic business activities through its regulatory reform drive. Yoon also promised consistent support for cutting-edge industries, as well as active diplomacy abroad to capture new export markets that will lead to Korean jobs.
수출 7천억 불, 외국인 투자 350억 불, 해외 수주 570억 불을 목표로 해서 국민들께서 직접 체감하고 손에 잡히는 그런 성과를 내도록 하겠습니다.
During the session, Finance Minister Choi Sang-mok presented the government's plans to stabilize price levels and livelihoods across the country. These include regulatory reforms to boost business activities, an $8.4 billion fund to stabilize the prices of energy, agriculture and marine products, and support packages to encourage home purchases, investment and tourism in underpopulated regions of the country. Meanwhile, among the 130 members of the public attending in person and virtually, participants expressed the need to cushion the impact of high inflation and interest rates. Bringing public discourse into the centre of policymaking, Yoon said the government must go beyond the stage of reviewing the situation to moving to resolve the issues raised by the people.
부처 칸막이를 전부 없애고 국민들이 관심 가질 수 있는 과제별, 주제별로 전국 곳곳의 민생 현장을 찾아서 국민 여러분들과 함께 토론하는 자리로서, 또 함께 고민하는 자리로서, 또 함께 해법을 결정하는 자리로 이렇게 만들어 가겠습니다.
The series of discussion-style briefings consists of 10 sessions on socio-economic issues spanning housing, jobs, public safety, transport, medical reform, low birth rates and energy policies. The second session on housing is scheduled for next Wednesday and will be held in an area under redevelopment plans. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
Today, the financial authorities released its economic policy plans for 2024. The overarching theme is to reinvigorate people's livelihoods after a year of high consumer prices and interest rates. Our economics correspondent Moon Hae-ryun joins me in the studio. Hello, Hae-ryun.
Good evening, Jung-min.
Evening. So how is this year's direction different from last year's?
So the focus last year versus this year is a little different. Last year, the government's aim was to overcome economic risks and reinvigorate the economy. But this year, there's more of a focus on people's everyday lives and helping to ease some of their financial burdens. This comes on the back of a more positive outlook for the economy. Here's what the country's finance minister had to say about the economic landscape for 2024.
With the recovery of global trade and the semiconductor industry, the economy is forecast to grow 2.2%, while the inflation rate is predicted to fall to 2.6%.
The government's policy direction for 2024 has been divided into 4 key areas: restoring people's livelihoods, managing potential risks, creating a dynamic economic environment, and strengthening economic policies for future generations. To restore people's livelihoods, the country will stabilize consumer prices, support small businesses, speed up the recovery of exports and domestic demand, and revitalize investment in construction. To manage potential risks, there needs to be a smooth resolution for the real estate project financing crisis, as well as managing household debt, stabilizing supply chains, and improving fiscal soundness. To create a dynamic economic environment, the government will be focusing on strengthening innovation and social mobility and guaranteeing fair opportunities for all. And finally, to support future generations, some key goals will be to secure financial sustainability, promote opportunities for younger generations, and respond to climate and population challenges.
And Hye-ryun, in that case, what are some new measures this year to ease financial burden for people and manage potential risks?
Well, Jung-min, as the key focus is to restore people's livelihoods after a difficult past year, there are new and improved policies geared towards lowering costs and supporting groups that were particularly affected by high interest rates and prices. And it all ties in with managing risks such as supply chains of intermediate materials to lower costs for domestic firms. One way that the government will be lowering prices this year to achieve its goal of pushing inflation back down to the 2% range is by removing or lowering tariffs for a record number of fruits and vegetables. The goal is to import 300,000 tons of fruit in the first half of the year for 21 different types of fruit. Here's what an expert had to say about the effectiveness of this policy in comparison to simply lowering prices through sales as the government did last year.
Usually what the government does is lower tariffs on imported foodstuff, and I think that should continue this year. Temporary sales, I'm not quite sure if it's such a good idea because it sets up a bad expectation perhaps that we will have sales every year.
One group that was particularly affected by rising prices and interest rates was small business owners, and a triple package of support has been planned for the first quarter of 2024. This includes reducing energy bills for more than 1 million small business owners, lowering loan interest rates, and expanding tax benefits. Experts have pointed out the need for a rigorous selection process to provide these benefits for viable firms. An issue which spiked towards the end of the last year was the disruption of urea solution supplies from China, highlighting the need to diversify and keep track of sources of intermediate materials to keep prices low for domestic firms. As well as setting up a new response committee to deal with supply chain issues, the government is also making a database of 200 key items that are crucial for economic security and establishing a fund of up to 10 trillion Korean won, or around $7.6 billion to boost domestic production capabilities of these listed items.
And what can you tell us about policies to create a dynamic and sustainable economy?
Well, this year there are several new policies that are designed to boost research and development, as well as tackling an ongoing issue for the country, the low birth rate and declining working population. I spoke to an expert about what needs to be done to help change the social stigma that's contributing to the 4-year natural population decline, so let's take a listen.
Career breaks for mothers are a serious issue, and the government needs to promote an environment where the workplace encourages the whole family to become involved in raising a child.
So the government will be expanding the period during which both parents can take parental leave from 12 months to 18 months. And in order to meet the demand for labor, there'll be around 100,000 more foreigners on E9 non-professional work visas compared to last year. Other than the workforce, South Korea is planning for the future in 2024, which involves heightening investment in the research and development sector. For the first time ever, the government will be temporarily increasing tax cuts by 10% for firms increasing R&D investments. So large companies that would have received tax credits of up to 25% of increment investments for R&D will now receive 35% of the amount. In addition to this, the government will be funding SMEs in 5 key sectors: chips, rechargeable batteries, bio, future mobility, and hydrogen industries, with a starting budget of 3 trillion won, or roughly $2.3 billion.
Major issues there. Thanks for your report today, Hye-jeon.
It was great to be here, Jung-min.
Seoul and Washington are currently carrying out their first combat shooting drill of 2024. It's part of a series of military exercises conducted by South Korea in the new year. North Korea has denounced the latest drills, warning that a clash between the two Koreas this year is highly likely. Our defense correspondent Choi Min-jung reports.
South Korea and the U.S. have held their first joint combat shooting exercise of the year. According to the military on Thursday, the exercise held near the inter-Korean border in Gyeonggi-do province and amid a, quote, severe security situation, was to verify interoperability between Seoul and Washington and to further strengthen the allies' operational capabilities. Around 110 vehicles were deployed, including Seoul's K-1A2 tanks and Washington's A-10 attack aircraft. The exercise comes shortly after Pyongyang criticized Seoul for beginning the new year with, quote, self-destructive acts, referring to South Korea's recent artillery exercises and naval firing drills. It also warned that the chances of a clash between the two sides will be at their highest this year. In response to the remarks, South Korea's defense ministry stressed the necessity of conducting exercises.
We have nothing to say about the vulgar expressions made by North Korea's media. As you know, conducting exercises is the military's most fundamental mission and role.
Meanwhile, South Korea's unification ministry on Thursday warned that North Korea has been attempting to create tension on the Korean peninsula and interfere with the South's internal affairs through its year-end key party meeting, as well as Kim Yo-jong's recent statement on President Yoon. The ministry added that such heightened tensions are aimed at interfering with the South's general election set for April this year. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
South Korea, the U.S., and Japan have re-emphasized that any weapons transfers from North Korea to Russia would be a clear violation of UN Security Council resolutions. This as Kim Tae-hyo, South Korea's Deputy Principal National Security Advisor, on Thursday spoke with his U.S. counterpart Kirk Campbell and Japanese counterpart Keiichi Ishikawa about countermeasures to Pyongyang-Moscow military cooperation. They also agreed to further solidify their cooperation framework established at Camp David in August last year, and to actively address North Korea's provocations and Russia-North Korea military cooperation at the UN Security Council in 2024. South Korea started its 2-year term as a non-permanent member of the UNSC this year. South Korea's intelligence agency recognizes North Korean leader Kim Jong-un's daughter, Kim Joo-ae, as being his most likely successor. This based on her appearances in public, according to the country's National Intelligence Service on Thursday. However, it added that it remains open to all possibilities considering various factors, including Kim Jong-un's age, and that he has no significant health issues, as well as the presence of other siblings. This marks the first time the agency has made such an assessment. In September, it had previously stated that it was too early to determine. However, Unification Minister Kim Young said last month that the North Korean leader appears to be in a hurry to put the spotlight on his daughter, indicating that she may well be next in line to rule the regime. Amid frosty ties with the North, South Korea's Unification Ministry officially announced today that it'll shut down its affiliated organization that's in charge of the now shuttered Kaesong Industrial Complex, a symbol of inter-Korean cooperation. Our North Korean affairs correspondent Kim Jong-sil explains.
It's official. The Kaesong Industrial District Foundation will be shut down. An official at the South Korean Ministry of Unification told reporters the news on Thursday afternoon. The foundation had been in charge of legal procedures for South Korean companies operating in the Kaesong Industrial Complex in North Korea. The announcement comes more than 7 years since the KIC, where North Koreans had worked for South Korean firms, halted all operations back in February 2016 due to heightened military tensions between the two Koreas. The dream of operations restarting was shattered back in 2020 when Pyongyang blew up the Joint Liaison Office in the complex. The South Korean government's decision comes as military tensions rise on the Korean peninsula, with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un calling it two Koreas, saying, quote, "The North-South relation is between two hostile states, not homogeneous ones," during his speech at the Workers' Party Central Committee meeting at the end of last year. The South Korean official added that the ministry will hold talks with South Korean companies that have facilities in the industrial complex within the next 2 weeks to explain how the ministry plans to continue supporting them on behalf of the foundation.
We have to understand that the Kaesong Industrial Complex served its purpose back at the time, but that's no longer the case. But we know that where North Korea's true heart was, and that happened to be nuclear development, not economic development.
Dr. Go added that it is important to focus on a new dynamic between the two Koreas as times have changed since the KIC was created. Kim Jong-sil, Arirang News.
In the Middle East, nearly 100 people have been killed in Iran from 2 explosions near the barrier site of a slain Iranian general. This deepens concerns over a wider regional war. Lee Eun-hee explains why.
At least 95 people have been killed and at least 211 others injured after a series of blasts on Wednesday near the gravesite of slain Iranian military commander Qasem Soleimani in the city of Kerman. Iranian state media says at least one of the explosions was caused by a bomb placed in a suitcase inside a car and appeared to have been detonated remotely. The second blast came around 20 minutes later when rescuers arrived following the first explosion. An earlier death toll of 103 was revised down by Iran's health ministry, which said some names had been repeated on the list of victims. However, with many of the injured in critical condition, the death toll could rise. The explosions came on the 4th anniversary of Soleimani's death in a U.S. airstrike, threatening to increase tensions in the Middle East even more. While no one has claimed responsibility for the explosions, Iran's President Ebrahim Raisi made strong remarks towards Israel during a ceremony to commemorate General Soleimani later that day.
I warn the Zionist regime, don't doubt it. You'll pay the price for this crime. These crimes that you have committed, you'll deeply regret.
Crowds gathered at the memorial and chanted "Death to Israel" and "Death to America." During the ceremony, Iran's military head singled those 2 countries out.
And you will see by the power of God that the one who has failed in this field and will leave this field more disgraced than today is the Zionist regime and the criminal America.
However, a senior Biden administration official said the blasts appear to represent a terrorist attack of the type carried out in the past by Islamic State militants.
We have no indication at this time at all that Israel was involved in any way whatsoever.
The deadly blasts come amid rising tensions in the Middle East after a drone attack in Beirut, which killed Deputy Hamas leader Saleh al-Aruri, Hamas's second in command. Lee Eun-hee, Arirang News.
In Japan, search and rescue operations continue as many are believed to remain trapped under the rubble of Monday's devastating earthquake that has taken some 80 lives, according to the latest tally. Choi Soo-hyung reports.
It has been nearly 72 hours since the powerful earthquake hit the Noto Peninsula in West Japan's Ishikawa prefecture, and the golden time to find survivors under the rubble is running out. The 7.6 magnitude quake that hit the region on the very first day of 2024 has taken at least 82 people's lives. According to Japanese media outlets on Thursday, 15 people are still missing and almost 500 individuals were injured in Ishikawa prefecture and neighboring areas. In Suzu City, the most affected area by the quake, 90% of houses were completely destroyed. And about 110,000 households in Ishikawa Prefecture and surrounding areas are struggling with electric power and water outages. Currently, over 34,000 people are staying in shelters and major roads were cracked down the middle in places, limiting the transportation of essential goods. As a result, supplies are being transported using helicopters and locals say essential food and daily life items are running out.
No supplies whatsoever have arrived. For food, everyone is cooperating and sharing. It's just so cold and there are also still aftershocks. I can't believe this is reality.
Some 2,000 rescue workers with the Japanese self-defense forces have been trying to rescue people from collapsed buildings, and over 150 people were rescued, but hundreds are still trapped under the rubble. Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida said on Thursday morning that the Japanese government would double the deployment of military personnel in the search.
We're actively addressing procurement for disaster victims, but it is challenging to deliver supplies to the victims due to transportation issues like blocked roads. To tackle this, we are making every effort to restore an urgent road restoration.
Japan's land ministry has said a ship carrying food and daily necessities departed from Kitakyushu on Wednesday and is expected to arrive at Wajima port by Friday evening. Choi Soo-hyung, Arirang News.
South Korean closing pitcher Go Woo-suk has signed with the San Diego Padres on a 2-year contract. The Padres announced Wednesday that there is a mutual option to extend the deal for the 2026 season, but did not disclose financial details. The 25-year-old spent 7 years with KBO club, the LG Twins, and was the final pitcher during the team's historic Korean Series win last year. Go is the second South Korean player at the Padres as he joins Gold Glove winning infielder and ex-KBO All-Star Kim Ha-sung. He's also second KBO star to move to MLB via posting this off-season, following Lee Jung-hoo, who signed a record 6-year, $113 million contract with the San Francisco Giants in December. There was a flash of a cold snap this morning, but with daytime temperatures rising, there was milder winter weather today. Tomorrow will not be too cold just like today, exceeding the usual temperatures. However, there will be some rain or snow in eastern Gyeonggi-do and western Gangwon-do provinces between dawn and morning. Tomorrow, the air will be murky across the country. Fine dust is a problem as the atmosphere stagnates. In addition, smoke from overseas will worsen air quality nationwide. From tonight, gusty winds are expected around the East Coast. Please pay special attention to any safety accidents. Relatively milder morning temperatures tomorrow. Seoul and Daejeon will start off at 3 degrees. Seoul will be topping out at 6 degrees. Gwangju and Daegu, 11 degrees Celsius. From the weekend, daytime temperatures will drop to -2 degrees Celsius on Sunday as the cold wind intensifies. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world. That is Newscenter for tonight. Thank you for watching. A panel session coming up.
Welcome. (24시간) 불이 꺼지지 않는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니? 하나, 둘, 셋.
Hey, Mr. Cupid, look my way. Make sure you listen to what I say. I may be stupid or quite naive.
끝없이 쏟아지는 포토스팟. 휴대폰 한 대로 감당할 수 있겠니?
Arrow straight through my heart.
Completely new. But something anyone can relate with. Flawlessly made. And tears that go with it. K-drama. Korea is coming at you with another story to tell.
Hello everyone, it's Thursday and you're watching Within the Frame. I'm Kim Bo-kyung. The world has ushered in the new year, but two wars continue. In terms of the Israel-Hamas war, the killing of a senior Hamas leader in a strike in Lebanon's capital, Beirut, has stoked fears of an escalation between Israel and Iran-backed militant group Hezbollah. With Iran accusing the Zionist regime of being behind two recent explosions near the Iranian general's tomb, worries heighten over Iran's involvement in the war as well. Though Ukraine and Russia exchanged hundreds of prisoners of war, the biggest single release of captives since Moscow's invasion began, their exchange of attacks continues in 2024. However, some reports suggest that Western allies are switching their policies as the war prolongs. How do experts see the latest developments of these two wars? For this, we invite Professor Shin Sang-hyuk from Kyung University into the studio. Welcome, Professor Shin.
Thank you for having me today.
Thank you. And we also have Dr. Aidan Hehir, a reader in international relations from the University of Westminster. Good to see you, Dr. Hehir.
Good to be here. Thank you.
All right, first question to our Professor Shin. So Hamas's deputy leader was killed by an Israeli drone attack at Lebanese capital Beirut. And if I'm correct, this was the first time that Israel reached into another country in order to kill Hamas leader. Could you walk us through this killing first?
Yes. The apparent strike hit a popular neighborhood in the Beirut southern suburbs. Actually, this area was a stronghold of the Iran-backed the Hezbollah. And another thing which I want to emphasize that actually since 2006 war between the two countries, this strike was the biggest one, the Israelis' biggest strike. And then Israel has not claimed the involvement in this strike. But as the report, as we can see many reports that the Hamas accused Israel of carrying out this the airstrike. So I think because of this war, as you pointed out, the possibility of the escalation of the war between the Israel and Hamas increased.
Right, I see. Well, Dr. Hehir, Israel insisted that the assassination of the senior Hamas leader was not an attack on Lebanon, but there are concerns over escalation in the region with Lebanon and Iran potentially becoming involved in the war, as our Professor Shin already pointed out. How likely is an expansion of this war in the Middle East? And has the possibility of a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas completely gone now?
Well, yes, I think it's a significant escalation and one which certainly poses a threat to regional stability. From the beginning, Israel said that it wanted to reshape the Middle East after the Hamas attacks, and this is part of that policy. I think it's very, very dangerous. It clearly brings Iran closer to the conflict. One of the features, I think, of the response to Israel's bombardment of Gaza has been a very obvious disconnect between the public in the Middle East and the action of the governments in the Middle East. So there's a huge public revulsion at what Israel is doing, but as yet the governments in the Middle East haven't really taken a particularly strong line. Rhetorically, they've condemned Israel, obviously, but they haven't done very much. Now, I think that's unsustainable in the long term. I think the nature of Israel's tactics, the extreme violence, the genocidal language and the genocidal tactics are stoking huge anger throughout the region, and it's inevitable that will, I think, result in some change in actual policies by states, particularly Iran. As for the possibility of a ceasefire, at the moment, Israel is essentially losing the war. It is not being able to degrade Hamas in the way that it hoped to. And it has put so much emphasis on winning this war, defeating Hamas, etc., that it's not going to sue for peace at the moment until it believes it's in a position of strength. And it's certainly not in a position of strength. It's losing international support, or more regional forces aligned against it. And you're only ever going to get a ceasefire, I think, or some kind of a deal if there is a sense that what we have at the moment is as good as it's going to get. And Israel certainly doesn't feel like that at the moment. So unfortunately, given the nature of the government in Israel as well, the chances are that this conflict will go on for quite some time.
All right, I see. Thank you for your point of view, Dr. Heer. Well, Professor Shin, let's turn our eyes to Gaza Strip here. The Israel Defense Forces announced the withdrawal of some soldiers from the Gaza Strip, saying that it is preparing for a new phase of conflict. What is the next phase, and how prolonged do you believe this war is going to be?
Well, the Israeli military forces announced that it would be beginning a withdrawal of several thousand troops from the Gaza Strip. Actually, the Israeli government did not disclose the exact figure, how many the troops they will withdraw from the Gaza Strip. But anyway, certainly they decided to withdraw several thousand soldiers from the Gaza Strip. And but the Israeli military forces spokesman emphasized that the move to demobilize some soldiers from the Gaza Strip does not suggest any compromise of Israel's intention. Their intention is they will continue to fight until they destroy the Hamas, and then the fighting is remain continued across the Gaza at the moment, and at the same time. The Israeli military spokesman emphasized that the warfare will be continued. I mean, in the year 2024. But we can see quite different the opinions about the situation happening in the Gaza. I mean, the U.S. officials, some of the U.S. officials and then the military analysis said that the withdrawal of the several thousand soldiers, Israeli soldiers from the Gaza Strip signals the shifting to the lower intensified pace of the war, even though the Israeli government did not recognize it. And so I think considering the situation happening and then certainly there is some possibility that the war could be end this year in the near future. But it is very cautious. Because that the Israeli government officially said that they will continue the war until they destroy the Hamas. Right. But the situation happening right now, we cannot eliminate the possibility that the war could be end earlier than we thought.
All right, I see. Well, we'll have to wait and see how it develops, but it seems quite definitely sure that the war strategy has changed.
Right.
Right, I see. Now, Dr. Heer, after the Iran-backed Houthi rebel group attacked a commercial container ship, the U.S. responded to its distress call, returning fire and sinking the Houthi boats. And though the U.S. said that it wants to avoid escalating the crisis further, it also added that Washington would continue acting in self-defense. What are the chances of the war becoming a wider regional conflict in Red Sea? And if that happens, what would the global impact be?
Well, I think the chances have increased, certainly, given what's happened in the last week. The key to all this really is the position of the United States. And obviously, given the election that's coming up this year in the US, that's going to play a significant role as well. The US, I don't believe, has any appetite for a regional war. It certainly wants to defend Israel, but it certainly doesn't want to get embroiled in a conflict with Iran. I mean, a war with Iran would truly be catastrophic. But it's also worth remembering that the Middle East isn't itself united. There are clear divisions, obviously, between Iran and Saudi Arabia, but even within the group around Saudi Arabia, there are also the divisions as to what to do next. And Saudi Arabia is moving in, is making efforts to integrate more into the international community, etc. And certainly, again, I don't believe it wants to become embroiled in any kind of regional conflict. But the nature of the international system at the moment is very much in flux. It's hard to work out what's going to happen next. And small, issues relating to the Houthis or what's happening in Gaza can have sudden, massive regional implications, and it could suddenly spiral out of control. There are a number of actors in the region, whether it's Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Iran, that all have a vested interest in reshaping the Middle East, as Israel itself has said, but that can't be done peacefully. And I think the chances of this escalating are certainly greater today than they were when the conflict in Gaza began in October.
I see. So though many players of this war are not that much interested in escalating the war, we would have to just wait and see what happens because, it could go out of control. Right.
Yes. Well, if you think about the Arab Spring, when that happened in 2011, that wasn't something that anybody particularly wanted. Certainly the existing regimes on the ground in the Middle East and North Africa, nor did the European powers or the United States want it, but it was a bottom-up movement that suddenly erupted. And, I think that there is a potential, again, for these unintended consequences to suddenly disrupt what is already a very volatile region and an already volatile global world order, which, as I say, is in transition at the moment, and various different actors will try to seize the initiative and move into gaps left by the United States as it retreats.
All right, I understand your point. Now, Professor Shin, I believe this will be our last question on Israel-Hamas conflict. South Africa has filed an application to the International Court of Justice to begin the proceedings over allegations of genocide against Israel for the war in Gaza Strip. How do proceedings normally work, and what impact would this have in the war?
To answer your question, I want to explain the 1948 Convention on Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, which was drawn up by, in the aftermath of the World War II and Holocaust. Actually, based on this, the convention, the South Africa has filed the application at the International Court of Justice. If I quote the definition of the genocide made by this convention, the convention defines genocide as acts such as killings committed with the intent to destroy in whole or in part the national or ethnical, racial, and in the religious groups. So South Africa insists that Israelis' actions are genocidal in character because they are they means that the Israeli people government is intended to bring about the destruction of substantial part of the Palestinian in Gaza. So they insist that the South Africans are filing includes this application at the International Court of Justice. And then if I had some more details about the South Africans the logics. The South Africans filing include a request for the International Court of Justice to urgently issue legally binding interim orders for Israeli government to immediately seize and suspend its military operations in and against Gaza. But certainly such an orders, known as provisional measures, would remain while the war is going on, while the case progresses. And but they certainly have legal bindings, but not always followed. This is the limits of this the system. But anyway, the remaining procedure, the court soon scheduled the public hearings. The judges drawn from across the country will likely to take days or weeks to issue the decision on preliminary measures. And then after that, the court will enter the lengthy process of considering the full the case. This is the remaining process at the International Court of Justice will take. So certainly, I think this case will drag for years, I think.
All right, I see. Well, thank you for your explanation, Professor Shin. Now,
but by the way, so certainly the question was about how the results and decisions made by the International Court of Justice, how it will affect the involving countries. Yes, it will, depending on the results, decisions made by International Court of Justice. The two countries will be affected very much, but particularly Israel. depending on the decision made by the International Court of Justice, will be influenced a lot. I mean, if they maybe criticize a lot because maybe if the action is regarded as of the genocide, certainly Israel will face a serious criticism from the international community.
Right, I see. It's quite ironic how once a victim has now become a perpetrator of this very case. All right. Well, Dr. Hehir, let's move on to Ukraine. Let's take a look at how the war developed as the new year unfolded. Both Ukraine and Russia continued a wave of escalating attacks. Could you walk us through the attacks?
Yes, well, there was a series of airstrikes, both by Ukraine and Russia. The war has largely ground to a halt in terms of the ground offensive. Ukraine bombed Belgorod, and Russia also incurred heavy casualties in Donetsk. But as the year has progressed, I think it's clear that the Ukrainian counteroffensive in the summer didn't make any significant breakthroughs. Russia has largely held on to, if not very slightly increased, the amount of land it occupies in Ukraine. It has significantly increased its weapons production, and it has recently aligned its budget more towards a complete war footing. And in doing so, it is focusing more on aerial attacks. By contrast, the European Union and the US are not providing Ukraine with quite as much weaponry and air protection as it once did. And again, that is related to what's happening in Gaza. The situation there has certainly drained resources from Ukraine, and obviously it's also altered the calculus from the West's point of view as to their particular priorities, and that has very ominous implications for the situation on the ground in Ukraine. I think before October, there was a lot of people who believed that the war in Ukraine was slowly moving towards an advantage to Ukraine, but I don't believe that's the case anymore now, and certainly Putin and the people around him feel that this is the situation in Gaza has presented Russia with a real opportunity now to engage specifically in airstrikes in an effort to degrade the capacity of Ukraine to defend itself, but also significantly undermine Ukrainian morale. And Russia, of course, has a huge population and will continue to pour troops into Ukraine, so that's not something that they're going to run out of, unfortunately. So I think it's a very ominous moment for Ukraine, and Gaza has had a significantly negative impact on Western support for Ukraine.
Right, ominous moment indeed. Now, Professor Shin, we cannot leave out, diplomacy regarding this matter. And the U.S. is reportedly quietly shifting its policy from supporting Ukraine's goal of total victory over Russia to improving its position in a negotiation to end the war. What does this hint at?
Well, I think the U.S. is rethinking its strategy for the war in Ukraine. Still, officially, USA government has declared there is a strong support for Ukraine. Well, as one of the action taken by the USA government is that, Biden administration include the $60 million budget for to support the Ukraine, for the weaponry and other aid for the Ukraine government as a part of the $105 million the budget request. Of course, this budget includes the Taiwan and for the Israel and Hamas war. But I think despite of this kind of the official stance of the USA government, something is going on behind the scene. Well, very recently, the head of the Zelensky's, the friction in the Ukraine parliament, Mr. Arirang, at his interview, he said that the Ukraine's dependency on the USA and the lack of legitimacy strategy are the main impediments to resolving the conflict with Russia. And then NATO chief. He said that our responsibility is to support Ukraine and put them in the best possible place when or if the peace negotiation may start. And then also he continued at another interview, he said that war is by nature unpredictable. But he said that the more military support we provided to Ukraine, the stronger their position will be on the battlefield, and the stronger their position will be on a potential negotiation table. So we can see something happen, and then certainly peaceful negotiation, I mean, to finish the war, to end the war in Ukraine as an option, the peaceful negotiation is emerging and is considering. So we can say that we have to wait and see, but considering the policy changes in major European countries like Germany and Hungary, and then the situation happening in USA, as you know very well, the Republican-dominant Congress has been quite shown negative response to the Biden administration's policy.
Right.
And so considering all of these, I think there are some possibility that the peaceful negotiation could be adopted as a way to solve the stop the war in Ukraine. But one thing more which I want to emphasize is that the response from the Ukraine government, President Zelensky, has been very strongly against those kind of ideas. But as you know very well, in 2022, just after the beginning of the war in Ukraine, many the experts, including former U.S. State of Secretary, Kissinger, Dr. Kissinger, he emphasized the importance of the peaceful negotiation as a way to stop the war in Ukraine. So considering all of this, I think, as I said before, we cannot eliminate the possibility to use the peaceful negotiation as a way to stop the war in Ukraine.
Right, I see. Well, since our Professor Shin already pointed out the USA and the Ukraine's position regarding this matter, I'd like to ask Dr. Hehir for this last question about Putin's stance of this war. During his New Year's speech, Putin vowed that Russia would never back down, but according to the New York Times, despite his bravado in public, the Kremlin has indicated interest in striking a deal to halt the war as well. Could you tell us what Putin might be thinking?
Well, I think initially he believed that he could win the war quickly. I think that there was an attempt to, at the start of the conflict, move troops into Kiev, and that failed. But since then, I believe that his policy has shifted, and I think he realizes that he's not going to be able to just overrun the entire territory of Ukraine. So his priorities now is to be able to leave the situation, to create some kind of ceasefire or peace deal or something like that, which allows him to claim victory by virtue of saying that I've taken a certain section of Ukraine, that he has taken over some of the land and what have you. And I think the war in Gaza has made that a very real possibility. I think a lot of people, like myself included, hoped that there would be internal opposition to Putin and this particular war. That clearly hasn't happened. Likewise, the idea that Ukraine would defeat Russia on the battlefield, again, I think is proving increasingly unlikely. The distraction of Gaza now has further undermined Ukraine's capacity to defend itself. So Putin is aware of that, and he said from the beginning that he didn't think that the West would be able to sustain its support for Ukraine, and now Gaza has happened. So from his point of view, the new goal of carving out vast sections of Ukraine and reintegrating them into Russia, or declaring them to be independent states and then reintegrating them, whatever it happens to be, I think that is a goal that he really does believe is now achievable, and it does look like it is achievable. Now, obviously, if the West says to Zelensky, we are urging you to sign an agreement with Russia, which involves you giving over vast sections of your territory, he's not going to be happy with that. That's going to cause tensions between, to put it mildly, tensions between Ukraine and the West, but also within the West as well. There are people who will see that as a capitulation, as an appeasement, similar to the appeasement of Hitler in the late 1930s. So again, this situation in Ukraine is likely to have profound implications for the cohesion of the West.
All right, I see your point, Dr. Heyer. Well, unfortunately, this is all the time we have for today's edition. Thank you, Dr. Heyer and Professor Shin, for your time and insights. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, that's all for Within the Frame tonight. We'll be back tomorrow with more in-depth stories. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.